practical challenges. Let's look at some of the lessons we've learned, just to make you think about, you know, do you want to do this? How do you want to do it? Challenges. I've said there's 2.5. And here they are. People, technology and bureaucracy. If I could have no people and no technology, it would be a wonderful project. You've already seen Matthew put the networks up. Looking at it from a problems point of view, as he mentioned, there are hills, there are low-flying aircraft, and they come over with radar and turn all your systems off. There are people who, you know, decide on their own to move their aerials, etc. Trees have leaves. Leaves interferes with wireless connections. So there's lots of things that goes on the network. And there's no general plan. There is no magic solution. That's a such and such problem. You tend to find they are individual problems. And as I mentioned earlier, we have certain access points that seem to fail on a fairly regular basis. We've changed out the equipment. We've stopped using Maker X and put Maker Y in. It still fails. We don't know why. His graphics are much better than mine, but we talked earlier, you know, that in fact, Dominic talked about it. We connect on to the Northumberland County Council network at Prudhoe Fire Station. We go up there and down here because that's the only way we could get around the mountain in the middle. We put a 12-metre mast up on this guy's farm, and we provide him with free connection, and a number of his neighbours are then tied in. They're paying for it, and we have to put a 30-metre mast up on the top of Mount Hooley, and I'll talk about some of those lessons we learned. Installing fibre. I mentioned right at the beginning that Daniel raises the money and then he says to me, could we do this? And he said to me one passing conversation, would you look after getting the fibre in the ground? I said, yes, not a problem. Surely it's not. But talk about hang hoist by your own petard. We've actually put fibre up the side of the road there. You might just be able to see the evidence. The guys have actually come down with a mini digger, dug a trench and laid the stuff and put it back. I phoned, didn't know where you got the wayleave permissions from. I phoned Cumbria County Council, who've outsourced this to an organisation called Capita. Spoke to the girl in Capita and I said, this is who we are, this is what we want to do. What do I need to do? And she said, I don't know. Which was a bit of a surprise. But it turns out that they are not used to people coming to them and asking what types of licences or permissions they need to have. They're used to managing people who know what they're doing, coming in and saying, here you are, darling, I've got this, that, and the other, and she stamps them and gives them back to them. But after the conversation where she did, they were really very helpful, I must say. She helpfully, right at the end, as a passing shot, she said, of course, if you were BT, you wouldn't have to apply for it, just go out and do it. So that really wasn't much of a help. But we went forward and we were told we needed an S60 licence, which is a streetworks licence to enable people to dig things up. We asked about what sort of permission we needed to dig up the verge, who owns the verge, and that's one of those sort of grey areas. But the council said that, I mean, I talked to the planning department of the council, and they said, well, look, tell us where you're going, give us a plan of what you're doing, and if we don't have any real issues, then go ahead and do it. So we got the permission, or we filled in the forms. We got a number of local people and organised to send them on a course. It then took months and months to get them on the course because we're not a big buyer of services, and the main contractors, the Wimpeys, the Bovises of this world, blocked the courses up, so it took forever. Then we got people on the course and we were told that, well, you need to have a supervisor's licence because there has to be a supervisor supervising the guys doing the digging. Can somebody both have a digging licence and a supervising licence? Yes. Then somebody else says no. So, in other words, the system that you're trying to liaise with doesn't actually know what it's supposed to implement. What else did we have to have? Went up the side of the road, that was okay. We went across some fields, so I thought we'd talk to the farmers. We do, but most of the farmers in this area get a grant from DEFRA, which is to do with the way in which they manage their fields. And for some of these farmers, that represents 80 or 90% of their total annual income. So they're hypersensitive to it, because the bureaucracy that administers it works on the basis, if you've done something that might impact your grant, we will stop all your grant until we get around to thinking about telling you what's going on, and then we'll give it back to you if we were wrong. But that might take 3, 6, 9 months. And from the farmer's point of view, his cash flow won't stand that. So what he says is, if you're going to cross my field and it might disrupt, I think it's called ESA, I don't want to know. So another journey for us, we set off to try and find out how we could get the farmers, should we say, the benefit of an outstanding or a general approval. It's administered by Natural England, thank you. Natural England, another government organisation, and there's a North East and North West branch. Alston's in the middle, and nobody's really certain who's responsible for it. So we start with the North West, and it turns out to be the North East, and then the people who are supposed to be there aren't there because they're on maternity leave or long-term sick, and nobody else is doing their job. And at the end of after an 18-month effort, minimum 18 months, we eventually got a standard letter which we could show to the farmers and give them a copy that said so long as we were only crossing grade 1 land, then they didn't have to worry, because this letter, if they were ever pulled up against the grant, this letter was good enough. But the only reason that we got that was because one of our team went to university with somebody who worked with somebody who knew somebody. Otherwise we might still be struggling. So there are lots of things, and the one lesson from this whole exercise, if I had to give it to somebody else, is get all your permissions in place before you start. We didn't, we were doing it as we were going along, we just didn't realise how big a problem it was. Working with the public. This is the same side of the road a bit further along, brand new refurbished house and everything else, and we say to this guy here, is it all right if we come across the front of your drive here and lay the fibre? Yes, he says. He neglects to tell us he's already commissioned the local guys to tarmac his drive. They tarmac the front here 4 days before we want to turn up and dig it up. So now you've got to go back and say to him, I know you've just had that nicely tarmacked, do you still mind if we come past and dig it up? And give him his due, he said, yeah, that's okay. Working with the public, you know, this is a narrow road, we are laying the fibre down the side, you can see how wide the road is, and of course you just get started, you're halfway through the trench, and along comes the dust cart, and it fits from side to side on the road. So and there's nowhere to go, there's a ditch that side, so you have to stop and get everything demobilised, move around the corner, let the dust cart get past, and the next thing is a tractor comes up. So it's not an easy task. Technical advantages. Dominic showed you a trencher. It works really well. It'll do 2,000 metres in a day, and they charge under £10 a metre. You saw some pictures Daniel showed you of it being installed. This is the ducting, the drum fits on the front of this tractor unit. It goes over the top, through the plough, and it's just laid straight to the ground. It's absolutely wonderful, so long as there's not stones in the ground. Well, this part of the world, for those who know it, we have quite a few stones in the ground, so they, you never quite certain what's going on. And then they take the easy route. It's that same road as we looked at before. And there's the ditch down the side, and instead of coming up the side of the road that all the other services are in, they went up the side of the road none of the services were in. And so they zipped down here with the fibre, and then it rained, and all this lot dropped off and fell in the ditch. So now the road's flooded because we've blocked the ditch, and the fibre's all exposed, so we had to go back in and put it all back again. When you look at it, it's easy to say with hindsight, it was a bloody stupid thing to do, but at the time you were doing it, it seemed like a good idea. So they're really just lessons, that's all. Road crossings, we did a super job here. There's a manhole, there's another one in the middle there, another one there, and we went under the road. We used what's called a mole plough, where you put some equipment in, you push a hole under the road and the fibre goes through it. Worked really well. But then this is the main A689, and we have to cross this road. And we have to cross it. That shop we saw before is just around the corner here, and we had to cross it, and then in theory we were originally going to come across this bridge. It turns out that the licence we had for digging up the side of the road doesn't apply to bridges. You need a separate licence for bridges, and this bridge, because it kept collapsing, is actually a solid concrete reinforced bridge with some tarmac on the top. So therefore we cannot rip through that, because we'll fundamentally destroy the structure of the bridge. So we said, well, this is a river under here. Can we go up the side of the bridge? Just effectively put the cable on the side. No, you can't do that. So we looked at other ways in which we could possibly come round we looked at going underneath the stream that goes through here. One of the problems we then found imagine that on this top picture, imagine I'm standing on the bridge and looking, the road goes round to right there. This land is obviously quite rough, it's solid stone, and it's not grade 1 ESA, it's grade 2 or 2.5, it actually belongs to one of the people in the audience here. And so this was virtually impossible to do. So we looked around for some other way to get around this problem, and lo and behold, we found there's a culvert goes underneath the road, and if we could go through the culvert and out the other side, that would solve all our problems. We wouldn't have to cross the road. So we got the county councils out to the relevant officers to talk to us about it, and we all stood by the side of the road. And it's the only time in my life actually somebody said to me, really, it's more my job's worth to let you go through there. And I said, but when you go down here, there's actually quite a few things on the side of the culvert. How did they get permission? He said, yeah, they actually didn't ask, they just did it. So the problem is, I'm not going to take them down. He said, but I can't give you permission to put it up. So we couldn't go under the culvert. We were back with the earlier picture of crossing the road. And that was quite an interesting experience. And I must say, the person who deals with the day-to-day interfaces with Capita is Jenny. And as we went on, she got more and more experienced of dealing with what we needed. So we're going to cross a road. And we're going to use one of those road saws that somebody showed you a photo of. It just cuts a groove and you lay the fibre into it. We've got the permission to work on the side of the road, and we've got the people who've got the licences. We had permission to cross the road. We had permission for traffic lights, and we'd hired the traffic lights. But we didn't have permission to dig up beneath the surface of the road. We need another licence to actually dig, not on the road, but in the substructure. And we didn't have one of those licences. So that's why we've got fines, because the inspector comes out and he says, oh, you haven't got all the licences. So he stops you. You've only got a 3-day licence for your traffic lights, and it takes a week to get another licence to enable you to start again. Somebody in the audience earlier over lunch asked me about inspection. Because we are not a utility, they come out to inspect us. The county council charges £75 per 200 metres. So we've put 8 kilometres in. They charge us £75 for every 200 metres 3 times. They come out and inspect us when we're working, after we've finished, and 18 months later to see that the job's been done properly in case we've got to go back and do it again. So it's another bill that you might not anticipate, and if you were a utility they wouldn't charge you. But they do. Managing the users. So let's deal with that side of it. Some of you who are based in Alston or whatever will hear that we have been having some challenging times of late as we've switched over from the old management system to the new one, because we've upgraded the speed of the network as well, and we've had all sorts of problems that we hadn't anticipated. What I would say is that the Azatel system that we have now got installed is a great boon, because we can remotely see every single user, every single connection, and work with them to identify what's happening and what their problems might be. But we've got 330 members. Some of them who's on the periphery recognise they're on the periphery and they don't have another service, and so therefore, they work with us. Others think that, well, why shouldn't they get the same sort of thing as they were in the middle of Manchester or something? So we have some challenging discussions, and that all falls on Jenny. We are in an area of low employment. Jobs are fairly limited. There are jobs to be had in Carlisle and Penrith, but they're 20-odd miles away. There's no public transport, and so therefore the cost of getting backwards and forwards exceeds what you'd get from your earnings. Now the rise of Facebook and other social networks, the issues on our forum aren't as much as they used to be, but we used to get people putting on the website forum comments about, I saw so-and-so driving his car and I know he's got no insurance. Has anybody called the police? So then whoever so-and-so was would spring up and say, that's a load of so-and-so, I've got insurance or this, that and the other. Yeah, but I saw you in the pub having 6 pints before you drove. And all this sort of stuff's going up there. And whoever's on the butt end of it doesn't try and fight the people they're corresponding with, it's Cybermoor's fight. It's Cybermoor's fault. Why can't you take this stuff down? Now, we moderate the discussion pages, but there's a certain amount of time. A lot of people put this up when they come back from the pub or something. It's 3 in the morning, they're totally drunk, and they're putting all sorts of stuff up that they might not put up when they were sober. So we're supposed to, out of a community spirit enterprise, manage something at 3 in the morning. And I'm the person who gets, I'm going to get my solicitor, I'm going to do this, that and the other. So another aspect of what we have to deal with is the management of the legislation and data protection, because people will quote Data Protection Act and had my rights infringes. So again, we provide that sort of support for our customers. Users who need a lot of experience. Jenny deals with this end of it. We have quite a lot of users who, memory lapses or whatever, older users, you tell them something one day and they've forgotten it the next day. Get themselves into terrible pickles. Sometimes you can fix it remotely, other times you have to go out and help them. These are all the reasons why the community project keeps on going when maybe a BT or a Virgin wouldn't do. A lot of the people here still operate the equipment that was given to them in 2001 as part of the Wired Up community. Now, if you think about how computer technology has advanced in that time, and they're probably still not running antivirus software or anything else. So it becomes a mess because under the original project, they were given the computers and given free support. They don't quite understand why they shouldn't still be given free support. So that's something else that we have to deal with. Managing the business. We've got 3 different bandwidths, gold, silver and bronze. And then we have the fibre connections, and Matthew's talked about that. Our widely dispersed network, we push the limits of the technology because we still have people we can't get to. So we have tried to get the network as extended as we can. That means that we are on the limits of length, interference with leaves or various other issues, etc. And so therefore we get a lot more support type calls than we might do if we were in an urban environment. And we've got to manage people's expectations, so they don't think that we are not being honest with them, not supporting them genuinely, just saying you're too far out. Because the only thing we can say is, well, okay, we'll disconnect you. And that isn't an answer for them either. Wireless equipment needs constant monitoring. You've heard Matthew talk about the benefits that we've got, that we can track every... What I should say, in case anybody's thinking about it, is we cannot see what sites people are on. We can identify the traffic loads they've got, the hours of the day they use it, if they're overusing the network. We don't have the ability to see what they're actually doing, and we can't monitor the information that's there in case somebody was going to ask. But Azatel gives us a whole bunch of things, advantages. We have built most of this with local contractors, but we don't have a constant demand. So therefore we can't have people on retainers. So the people who we have who've got the knowledge and experience are often self-employed guys who are off working somewhere else at other times. So we might have an emergency, we really need somebody to run up and change an aerial, and the only guy who's got the working at heights licence is away until Friday. So we've got we have to have some fallback. Accounts. Obviously, we have to keep those accounts that you would expect being a company registered. Industrial and Provident societies are not monitored by Companies House, they're monitored by the FSA, the Financial Services Authority. But the funders are getting increasingly weird about how much time they want you to keep your records for. And we've got some RDPE grants, and we have to keep a complete set of documents, every single piece of documentation, until December the 31st, 2025. I have no idea what happens if we're not around then. I certainly don't expect to work for Cybermoor in 2025. Limited funds means limited manpower. People have got to have reflectors for floats, they've got to be amenable. You know, I know Jenny's really good. When she gets up in the morning, she switches the phone from the office, goes through to a mobile phone. But she'll have people ringing up at 6 o'clock in the morning saying, it's gone down, this is not working. Why isn't somebody doing something about it? And the same thing at 11 o'clock at night. We are now in a position where, because of the Azatel system and the relationship we've got with Northgate, we can manage at least to support it. But there's been times when Jenny goes on holiday and takes the phone with her. And so she's on holiday answering the phone saying, oh, it's Mary, my broadband's down again. And she's trying to fix it remotely. Community spirited. So, there's the image. I would suggest that's probably the right number of plates, but we haven't got that many people. So it really is a plate spin exercise sometimes, and it's part of what I was suggesting earlier in the concept of the broadband in the box. How can we help other communities to extend their operations and provide layers of support? And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Legislation, there's lots of it. The fact that we are smaller, social enterprise or whatever, doesn't mean it doesn't apply. Somebody asked me earlier about policies for volunteers, child protection, everything else. The same legislation applies to us as it does to any of the large charities. And so therefore what we have done is, and we're reviewing it at the moment, is put together an extensive pack of all of our policies and procedures, etc., that again we can make available as part of the project support. Because even when it comes down to managing volunteers, you have to have a policy by which you identify them, recruit them, manage them, train them, and all the rest of it. It's no good saying, but we're only a tiny group, we can't afford to do that. If one of your volunteers has an accident or something happens whilst they're doing some work for you, you are legally responsible. And so you know, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a financial liability so long as you've got the right procedures in place. So it is quite an onerous task, and it's taken us years to write all these. One other thing I would say, this is a piece of our fibre connection cable, our Cat5 cable, that runs up the side of the mast on the top of Mount Hooley. And one of our guys was up there doing some work, and he said, cable's been dug up and looks like it's been nibbled by rats. So we worked out how to protect it from rats. But it's one hell of a big rat that does that. So we have now concluded that we just had a cow that thought it had got hold of a really thick piece of grass. And this has been through the cow's mouth. And funny enough, when you buy cable, it doesn't specify cow-proof. It's one of those things you don't expect to get. You know, we now bury all the stuff inside ducts and things. So, summary, last shot. It's not a simple task. Events seem to conspire against you. And when you've only got a very small team, it's a bit of a challenge sometimes that you've got nobody else to pass it on to. You can't take a day's rest or whatever else it is, you know. A lot of it falls onto Jenny. Sometimes you pass it back to Daniel and I. But really there's not much else to do. We talk to the board, etc. But it is a challenge sometimes. Lack of resources is always a problem. You've never got the numbers of people you ought to have. You can never do things as well as you might like to do. Don't be dissuaded. You know, a community solution might only be the solution you've got. So you've got to see if you can find a way to make it happen. There are organisations such as us, Community Broadband Network, etc., who can help reduce the unknowns, because that's really what you want to know. I used an analogy when talking to one of you earlier on today. You know, imagine that you set off to climb your first mountain, and you look across the fields and the mountain in the distance, and it doesn't look very high, so you've got all the kit in the back and off you go. When you get to the foot of the mountain and the cliff's like this, you've got two options. You either climb that mountain or you give up and go home. I'd hate to think that you got that far towards your project and then realised what the problems were and said, it's not for me. So if we can help that, or if CBN and other organisations like that can help, then that's what we're here for. Okay, thank you.